A few weeks ago, I sat down with AI, and in about 15 minutes, I had a working portal for a listing site connected to our CRM system. It's interesting to note, I run sales and marketing. I'm not an engineer, and I was genuinely impressed. A few things needed tweaking, but all in all, it was a really, really impressive effort. And then I showed it to the developers, and they were like, hey, that's a great start. I'm like, start? This thing's working. I think this is probably days from being ready for rollout. It was a rude awakening. Hi, I'm Wes Snow. I'm joined by my partner and co-founder, Todd Terry. He's the technical arm of this duo and has gone much further down the road than I have in testing out what AI is and isn't capable of. This is a conversation today that's going to discuss the gap between an AI demo and production-ready software. I've listened to enough podcasts and read enough hype to want to get on this train and figure out what is reality versus what is hype. And so I did. I broke down and I said, well, let's see what I can do and where I'm going to get stopped. And candidly, I got a lot further along than I thought I was. And that was a good thing and a bad thing. I think from a good thing, it allowed me to articulate my idea to developers with more context and more tacit capabilities. In the past, it's been more of a PowerPoint or a Figma type exercise there, or just conversations like I'm having today. And those are great, but this particular output was really good at helping me with that. But my belief system was that it was much more than that it was actually working software. So Todd, you've gone much further down this road than I have, and you've shared some of those stories off camera and sitting in Porto together. And I'm sure there's some things that you can enlighten me on and the audience here ultimately in this journey to try to figure out what is hype versus what's reality when building software leveraging artificial intelligence, because I got emboldened in thinking that because I was able to expedite the prototype, that meant expediting the rest of the story as well. And it sounds like that's not really it. So maybe you can share some thoughts.
Well, what you did build was real software. I mean, you imagined something, you were able to describe it to an AI model, and it built what you described. And there's nothing, we shouldn't demean that. That's actually working software, but it's working software for more of a personal app or a prototype. And that's very powerful. It's extremely powerful that what used to be a time when our customers or even as a product manager, we would describe software in the terms of user stories and business requirements. Now we can build something and iterate with an AI agent to where it looks and behaves the way we expect it to, and then present that to an engineering team. And that's where the cognitive dissonance starts for me, because I did the same thing that you did. I have two sort of stories about this. My first story is when, one's a lesson and learned, and one is kind of the same wow factor. So let me start with the wow factor. We needed to build and deploy a website for our Portugal office. It wasn't a sales and marketing thing. It was just we needed to stand up a instance that when we were doing anything regarding getting our company registered, there needed to be something that the agencies could look and see, yeah, we're a real company. Here's our address. And so I'd heard about Lovable, and I thought, this is a good opportunity for me to give it a test go. And I was shocked, like you. I mean, I explained what I needed. I gave it the most time that I spent was the copy. And I even used AI to help me with the copy. And I handed it to Lovable, and I uploaded our logo and some photos of our office. And it had a working website in a matter of minutes. And I don't remember if it seemed like 15 minutes. It could have been an hour, but regardless, it was an engineering feat, it seemed to me, to do such high quality work. And so I spent a little bit more time kind of kicking the tires and saying, okay, well, if somebody fills out a form and wants to be registered as a lead, how do we route the lead? Well, guess what? I could do all of that too. So things that used to be a bit harder probably take a week or two from an agency or our own team was suddenly half a day. And the only thing I didn't do was deploy it, because I needed to send it to our DevOps team, and our DevOps team took care of deploying it. But that was like, there's a sea change here in what we can do as someone who has the vision and the idea, who has the requirements. The things we can do are suddenly unlocked. And so, like you, the thing that I guess when we say it begs the question was, what do our engineers do with a tool like this? What happens with the software development lifecycle? Why isn't what you built a production ready tool? And if it isn't, then what's the gap? And if it took so quickly for you to do it, surely our team could do it just as quickly.
Yeah. I mean, these conversations that you and I've had about some of these pet projects, we start off with a great deal of enthusiasm and both led to believe that because of the learnings we had in the acceleration, that we would be accelerating the completion of these pet projects as well as projects that were already in the market. And the reality is they're not quite done or they're stuck in the mud somehow. And that which we're feeling internally with our own pet projects and so forth is also that phenomenon that our customers are feeling is okay. And as you know, many of them have gone in and done the same thing that I've done and that you've done, and they've gone in and built something that looks and feels like it's complete. And candidly, for our internal initiatives, have a tough time digesting why it still takes what it takes. And certainly as I turn outwardly to our prospects and our customers, I'm left with having to solve that for them as well. And ultimately, that I think would be great to really just drill down into and understand what is it that I'm not thinking about and not appreciating internally, as well as what do I need to be able to convey to our prospects and customers that they should appreciate. Because the reality is it's not a magic button. Yes, there are some things that are getting accelerated, but there are some things that still take time. And maybe you can help with your experiences distill that down for this audience.
Yeah, it's still not so easy to explain or to keep a reality check in your mind, especially as every few months a new model comes out that has more capability. And so we all have this feeling of inevitability that pretty soon we're going to get to the point where we just speak and it will appear, and maybe that will happen. But right now, I think it's important to understand, what is this AI model that's doing this work. I think it helps to frame it exactly where it came from. And, let me bring the second story, the experience that we had. This was shortly after ChatGPT 3.5 was released. That's when everybody went, oh my God. It was just like the talk of, have
Hmm.
you tried ChatGPT 3.5? Have you tried it? Have you tried it? And so another developer and I had this idea. We said, this is probably the perfect opportunity for us to solve a problem for our customers. And our customers in the commercial real estate industry, they're often doing lease or sale abstracts, and they're usually paying somewhere between $100 and $300 per abstract. And, we work with those abstracts. We work with taking that information and somehow getting, a lease comp into the
Right.
system. And we're seeing, okay, well, if we have an LLM and we can take a lease, why can't the LLM do the abstract and then fill basically the forms needed to push that into an ERP or a CRM system like ours? And so we did a proof of concept, this developer and I. And this is exactly the same type of thing that you experienced, but this was, more than 3 years ago. Hard to believe. The first part of the proof of concept was amazing. We saw that we could hand, even then, ChatGPT 3.5, a document, and it could answer questions about that document so accurately, what seemed to be so accurately, that we're like, well, all we have to do is have a template of questions. And that template of questions, as it rolls through the application, can pull this information, build the abstract from what it extracts, and we've solved a problem. So within, I don't know what it was, a week, we had a working proof of concept. And we felt like we had proved enough to hand it to a development team and say, make this a product. And of course, back then, nobody had developed AI tools or AI
Right.
products. So everybody's learning together.
Yeah.
And this dynamic occurred that still happens today, where everything was easy. Then it gets a little bit harder. And then it's the model, which was so smart in the beginning, starts to make some mistakes. And then it starts to fool you, maybe even cheat. So you start doing all kinds of things that you would normally, as a company who builds software, you would say, okay, we need to personify we need to break this into different roles. We need a developer role and a QA role and we need to work these separations together to cross-check and do all these things that we would normally do. And it seemed to work. But after a few months, we had built something that probably 80% worked, but that last 20, the hardest parts of the
Yeah.
tests that needed to be passed weren't passing. And so we ultimately put it on the shelf and said, it's not ready. We blamed it on the model. We said the model is not ready to deliver the determinism and the accuracy that needs to happen. And it kind of reminds me, there's an old saying, the first 90% of a project takes 90% of the time, the last 10% takes the other 90%. And that's exactly how
Yeah.
these AI projects feel.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned to me, and I felt like we were in so far the future, you said, Wes, I've actually built personalities that I'm working with. I'm orchestrating this, but I've actually generated a virtual human being to be the business analyst and another one to be the senior solution architect. And you hear of all these stories about who's going to be the first one person, one employee valued billion organization. And you get sucked into that and you see some of these experiences early on. Tell me a little bit about what you consider to be the reality of virtualizing these roles and possibly the absence of a true human being orchestrating those roles there, because it sounds like you had some ideas to do that, but it didn't quite manifest the way that you'd hoped it would.
Well, it was very entertaining, to say the least, but it was entertaining because sometimes it even boiled into what seemed like an episode of The Big Bang Theory. I even had situations where the QA agent was getting so frustrated with the developer agent because it kept missing certain things that the QA agent was telling it that it should do. And the stories were comical. And it was also a learning experience because you realize that these large language models, they were trained on data, millions and millions of lines of code, of documentation, and this behavior became part of the AI because the humans that were driving all of these aspects of what we're doing in software development were exactly the data that got trained, the good behaviors and the bad behaviors. And so whereas the personification of agents, giving them a specialty, priming them on certain body of information, it is helpful. And it is, even now, as the models have gotten better and better, every white paper I've read, from whether it comes from Anthropic or OpenAI, you still have cross role, like an implementer and a reviewer. But I guess as I've matured working with AIs, I've kind of lost the personification side of things. Where I'm getting those is like, why is it still important for that? And baked into this is what it's trained on.
Well, tell you what, let me ask a couple questions here. You hear these large organizations like Microsoft and Salesforce and others where there's a huge reduction in force around the developers. And then you hear others, this one person billion-dollar valued company. And you have to imagine that it's coding. I've heard someone say, well, I don't think anybody ever has to draft one more line of code here. So if that's true, or maybe it's partially true, then where does the energy and the effort go into a project like this if coding is truly being automated or enabled dramatically using artificial intelligence?
So I've read and I've seen what appears to be evidence of this, that we've hit the turning point of where, statistically speaking, AI coding agents make fewer mistakes than humans do. I mean, there's always exceptions. There's going to be the exceptional developer who can still outperform a coding agent. But right now, coding agents can perform, statistically speaking, making fewer mistakes. But that does not mean that you can forgive a process of necessary engineering rigor. Here's an example of that. So we talk about an LLM has been trained on millions and millions, maybe billions of lines of code. So you feel this when you give it the POC, the proof of concept. When I did the proof of concept for the lease abstraction, it has already probably an end-to-end idea of what needs to happen, because so much of what it has been trained on are proof of concepts or first phase projects, or just these exact types of things. You've probably noticed in your proof of concept that it even gold plated. It did some really cool things that you didn't even ask for. And you're like, wow, I didn't ask for that, but it did it anyway. How smart.
Yeah.
It's not smart. It's because that's what it learned when it
Mm-hmm.
pulled in. So an interesting dynamic happens. What you've just been given is an impression of capabilities that there's no reason to think that this wouldn't continue exactly along the same line as you progress down a roadmap of a product. But what's happening instead is the foundation is growing and it's no longer a greenfield project where in its context it can see the entire code base. It has to start making compromises on what it holds in its context, what it knows about versus what it's doing for every new feature, every new deliverable. And this is where a word that almost never used has become part of an everyday language, and that's drift. It starts to drift. And the drift is very subtle and it's very undetectable, but it's there and it makes undetectable mistakes. We won't even call them mistakes, but something that you had in your original, let's say, specification, or maybe your specification was just a business requirement, and then it implemented something based on a business requirement, but it didn't implement like a technical spec. And so every new model that comes on is a blank slate. It examines just enough information based on what you now want as a feature, and it implements what it's been trained on, something very quick based on some level of information that it's been trained on. I mean, at its core, an LLM is a very capable auto completion engine, and tokens are predicting what is the next word, what is the next sentence, what is the next, and this is great for coding, by the way.
Yeah.
It's great. But as it builds more and more, the foundation doesn't fit perfectly, and things start to slow down. And this is what I've noticed. We noticed it on the lease abstract project. I've noticed it on the personal projects that I've worked on. Our team notices this. You read about it. That everybody's noticed this. That the bigger that your project grows, the longer it takes to get something done, the more mistakes the model will make, the more stupid the model will seem. Like, God. In fact, I've even laughed a couple of times thinking, well, our jobs are safe because it doesn't know the difference between this and this. And it's because of this dynamic of it's just using the data that it has to predict the next word or sentence. And it may not fit perfectly with the base that it's building on top of. And it starts to erode. It just starts to erode.
Yeah. So let me kind of make this practical, tactical, not only for my benefit, but for the folks that are listening to this. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten frustrated. Okay, you just given reason as to why coding isn't being done, but there's still a need to monitor, orchestrate, and oversee it. But still, I have this disconnect between what I've experienced personally in terms of that first leg of this system development lifecycle, and then these protracted timelines and estimates that I've been received, and ultimately the cost to getting things done. And so that's a frustration for me internally and you when we want these things to get done for our own organization. But I also have to defend those estimates externally to our prospects and our customers. So if coding isn't done like it was done in the past, and we were able to accelerate proofs of concept, where is that time going? What is the energy that is being put behind this that is so necessary in order for it to be product worthy?
So you mentioned estimates. One of the things, it's not a direct answer to your question, but I think it's interesting, so I want to mention it. I've in working with these agents, and it illustrates the kind of the situation of training data. So I'm interacting with the agent, we're scoping something, and I know that it's probably going to take 15 minutes to an hour to do this. And we agree on the scope, and I didn't even ask for an estimate, and it'll volunteer that it should be done in 3 days. And it's sort of laughable. I've had to tell the agent, stop giving me estimates. They're not even relevant. It's like, why is it saying that it's going to take 3 days to do this one thing? And it's the same power that makes a coding agent so powerful, is that it's been trained on all this coding examples. Well, it's also been trained on existing SOWs, existing proposals, and existing estimates, which is pre-AI. And it's using this information to say, oh, complex equals months, simple equals weeks. So as it starts it's these examples that it uses to build estimates kind of in the way things were before AI. So you have to take that into account. Now, this can be fixed by a system. You can build an estimation system where it's not using just language. It's actually something a bit more mathematical, the same way our engineers really need to follow to build an estimation system. And AI can do that, and we can actually use AI to build accurate estimates to answer your direct question, like why does it take long? It still takes longer. Why? Well, part of it is what I'm talking about, where the more your code base grows, the more things slow down. Now, it's not like every project now with even with the greatest and latest models of Fable and Soul and that just were released, not everything's going to be AI slop, but it will be AI slop if you don't bring an engineering rigor to the process. With these systems that you bring to the development process, it's the same things that we've been doing as engineers. We just move up the value chain a little bit more. We still should be using AI. AI can still code very accurately, and it can still unlock a great deal of productivity. But there's so much more planning that now needs to take place. So instead of giving the agent an instruction and letting it just do what it thinks it needs to do, maybe even after taking a quick tour of the code base, it needs to be given test cases. It needs to be given plans. It needs to be given specs. A lot of the thinking that the agent would have to do or need to do before it started the work, you need to do that for the agent with another agent, a BA type agent, where you build the structure around what is the work that the agent needs to do. Take away its need to do thinking and planning. That planning's already done. And that's something that you as an engineer need to review and say, yeah, this fits in with the code base. This fits in with our strategy. This actually works. And then when you give the agent the guidelines and take away its decision making where it didn't need to decide how to architect it, you give it the architecture, you're more likely to be successful with that.
Yeah.
And you're more likely to build a system that won't fall over later.
One thing that you and others have told me is that, Wes, when you build this proof of concept prototype, it probably would work wonderfully if it were just you that were using it. But you're actually building this something that's got to scale, and it's got to account for not just the happy path use case that you know how to work through the platform, but you've got to take into consideration those edge cases and other things and make sure that you're handling how the experience is going to be when someone does something unorthodox or just wildly different than what you'd thought of. Maybe there's I'm sure things that are being included in the rigor that you speak of that deal with those pieces as well.
Yeah, oh my gosh, the things that you can now do for personal productivity is incredible. Like when you don't need to think about multi-tenancy and you don't need to think about necessarily security because whatever you've built is running on your own computer that just has access to the same things that you have access to. Though it unlocks all kinds of things. But so for people who, especially experts in some domain who need something for a personal app, they can likely without needing the help of some other technical person, they can do so much, especially if they're curious and this is something that they want to do. I mean, they're specialists in a field. If this is how they want to learn and spend some of their time, then man, more power to you. But if it's for an organization, for a team, for a company, there's so much more that needs to take place that's always been there. The security aspects, how is it communicating with the database? Is it using the right kind of encryption? Is it properly built for multi-tenancy, or have there been too many holes left in there? You can ask the agent to do these things, but if you don't really know what all that means, then you won't know if it's done or not. So this is the type of rigor. I keep coming back to that word, engineering rigor, but this is something you can't skip, at least not yet, and why it's important to plan that from the beginning. And that's also why sometimes where prototypes stay prototypes. You've done something amazing. You've delivered a prototype to a team. You have done more in that deliverable than you were ever able to do in a week-long interview. And they can take that and use it as reference and add the rigor to what you've done from the beginning, because that's really important, and build it on a foundation that becomes exactly what you had in mind.
Yeah. Well, there's two things as you were talking that occurred to me. The word sycophantic, I had never heard it before until I started working with AI tools. They're trying to please you. And I think there's a whole nother episode that we could speak to in terms of how to eradicate that from it, because I get frustrated. Do not appease me here and actually put rules in place. But the thing that I want to kind of hone in on is just because you've built something and it works and maybe even deals with edge cases and so forth, there's this term that's coming up called tokenomics, and being able to do it in such a way that it doesn't render itself unviable because of the consumption of tokens that are being consumed during the general use of this. Maybe you can speak a little bit to there being this heightened discipline of taking that into consideration. Yes, we want the features and functionality to be delivered on, but we've got to do it with the context of, well, we can't do it and with this all-you-can-eat buffet token world that we used to live in. It's now a scarcity world versus this subsidy model. Maybe you can speak to a little bit of the burden that's placed on whomever's developing that, and how they need to navigate those waters.
Yeah, so you brought up a few things here on the fact that the model's trying to do exactly what you're asking it to do, and sometimes, although it's gotten better, it will even lie, cheat, and steal to accomplish the tasks that you've given it, including lying to you and telling you more of what you want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
The tokenomics piece, it's interesting, it seems like just a few weeks ago, we were hearing stories about companies that were setting quotas, like you have to spend at least this much money
Right.
per person. If you're
Token maxing, is
not
that what they called it? Token
token
maxing?
maxing,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're not using AI like you should be. And so people were even dreaming up. It reminded me of these applications that you could download that would move your mouse every so often so your light would always stay green on whatever tools you were using. So it's kind of like that. People were just wasting tokens just so that they wouldn't show up on the reports as someone who's not using AI. And then the company started getting the bills and they started seeing, oh my God, this is really expensive. And now we need to economize on token spending. And so this is a really unique dynamic because right about this is also the same time that really powerful models like Fable and even GPT 5.5 came out twice as expensive as the previous.
Mm,
Their
mm,
tokens in and tokens out were huge jumps. Now they were saying, yeah, they're more expensive, but they're also more efficient. And so really it comes out in the wash. Well, not always. In fact, there's even this newest version of Sonnet, version 5, is so token inefficient that it's in some cases more expensive than the Opus 4.8 model. So it's interesting. So, what does all this mean? Companies are needing to pay attention to things that they didn't have to pay attention to before, like using less expensive models for more simple tasks, but not depending on users to know when to route. So building auto routing or building intelligence into the applications or the orchestration so that the orchestration model knows to route something to a less expensive model. So this is important for the software
mhm,
design part of things, where if we're building any sort of app, our Salesforce AI suite, we have, different types of routing. For example, to use less expensive models in certain cases, to use thinking in more expensive cases, where thinking is needed. It's in pretty much everything in our composer products. If it's a simple query based tool where we need to pull the data from somewhere and make sure that it's complete, can be much less expensive model. But when we need the power of design, let's use the more expensive instead of just using the expensive models every time. So that's kind of the dynamics behind tokenomics.
Well, I tell you what, I think we've got a couple of topics that we can actually have some other breakout sessions for, but maybe if we could kind of discuss what are the things that we could share with others that we've learned internally that keep them from falling into the same traps that we have on believing that something can be done in a really shortened period of time and the reality being something far greater than that. I mean, to pierce through all the hype and hyperbole of people saying that they've created an app over the weekend and so forth. I think we touched on a few. You've got to make sure that you design this for scale. Don't get sucked into the vortex of just because you built it for one person doesn't mean that it actually can be scaled for a larger community of users. Multi-tenancy was something you mentioned. Also, this dimension of making sure that you optimize it so that it's not a token hungry application. But what are some other things that we can share with folks that we learn the hard way that we can share with them so that when they get presented some sort of a timeline, a cost structure, because hey, we all want it to be delivered faster and cheaper, but what's the unintended consequence of doing that? Maybe you could speak to a couple of those things.
Yeah. So, in general, AI can be incredible multipliers, how they can synthesize the data and use exactly what AI is for to bring this data from multiple sources and to synthesize it into some sort of deliverable, whether it be an offering memorandum or a quickly generated but very useful set of comps or property brochures or whatever it might be. These things are just right down the fairway for what our customers typically would use AI for. There needs to be a level of trust in what is ultimately getting put into those documents that are being delivered to customers. So they need to make sure that a trust model is built into it so that the provenance of this information is tracked from its source and can be verified all the way to the end document. And that is not easy. That there's a reason why that doesn't appear automatically in tools like ChatGPT and Claude Cowork. It can produce the data for you very quickly, but it doesn't automatically give you sourcing. So that's something that our customers need to think about. They also need to think about, and I'm even thinking of my own experiences here, when, for example, when we would build a proposal for a prospect, the amount of time we would spend poring over the information from the prospect, pouring into research on exactly how to piece together a solution. It's something we became intimate with. The presentation, we could give it with our eyes closed because we had
Right.
been through with that data so much. We were the authors of this data. AI has made it so easy to produce these presentations, this proposal, this information that the human nature part of this, my productivity has been multiplied by 10. I can handle 10 times more prospects and do 10 times more presentations. But now there's kind of a warning flag that we're going to start to lose the intimacy we have with the data and where it came from. And when we're challenged on this information, and this translates to our customers too, when they're challenged on this information, they may not be able to quickly explain where the information came from or how they got to it. So it's just, I don't necessarily have a solution for that, except make sure you pay attention to that when you're building your systems, that you stay in touch with where this information came from, how it came about, and why it's important. And this is definitely a service or a deliverable that you can trust, that you can implement.
Yeah. Not being a developer, maybe something what you said made me think about is the difference between taking a note down from a meeting and then having an AI note taker taking that down and then summarizing it. While it may get done faster and maybe even more complete, there is a detachment from those notes that you no longer personally feel a remembrance of because you checked your brain out and you allowed it to do that. And I found that I become lazy in some ways and a little
Yeah.
bit detached from some of the conversations that I'm having. Now, speed was there, but I think there's some consequences down the road. And I have to imagine that that same thing applies when someone is not touching code or getting intimate with it. And it's not only about fully appreciating what's done, but gosh, another thing that you and I talked about is maintainability, right? If something other than a human did this and fast forward 6 months, a year down the road, and there's either a change, course correction, or something breaks, there's, I think, challenges with regards to having AI necessarily understanding fully the context of that break and being able to fix that. So I know that you shared some of that. I don't know if you want to jump into that a little bit.
Yeah, this dynamic that you're describing is happening with, I assume it's happening with all knowledge workers, whether you're a developer who you've already started to lose sense of your coding skills, they've already started to dull a bit. There's some other skills that have sharpened, like your systems thinking and coordination, and you become a better manager of multiple streams of work. But that intimacy of the core skills that you had, they're going to change. And if you think about this is happening with you, it's happening with your colleagues. And pretty soon it's going to be harder and harder to find, an explanation of, now, why did we do this? What was the reason behind
Right.
this choice? Whatever that choice might be, whether it's an architectural decision or whether it's a choice to invest in a particular property or whatever it might be. So, all of those things will definitely be dynamics that need to be taken into account.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I heard when I asked how long is it going to take and why is it taking that long, considering you said that AI is writing all the code, there's things like discovery, testing, data migration, security review. Are we going to pilot this or not? Are we going to train people on it? And most of that, I think, mysteriously gets removed from anybody's expectations as to why there's an estimate. Those still have to be done. And many of those things are largely being done by human beings, talking with other human beings and such. Any amplification of those points?
I can't say it better. Again, we get so used to multitasking. It's like this. You've said it. I've said it. AI is supposed to make us so much more productive that it should give us time to, a lot of free time. Well, where's my free time? I
Yeah,
don't see it.
exactly.
And so, I mean, it's just happening everywhere. And so, this sort of fast pace, make quick decisions, trust AI a little bit too much. It's things that need us to slow down and pay attention and focus on, like testing the software with our hands and eyes. And they become harder and harder to do. This ADD thing will, I think, compound. And just like we overtrust our agents in many cases, there is a potential that even our clients, as we're delivering software to them, it's going to be hard for them to focus. I'm sure the same dynamics are happening in their world, just a little bit differently. And so, yeah, these are things we have to pay attention to: the training, the testing, the taste. It's human taste that determines if something's been designed well and is it accomplishing what should be happening with the software. That these are things that at least now are
Mhm.
better left to humans and need to be continued by humans.
Yeah. And there's the age-old issue that you and I, as a company that started off as a professional services firm and then started building product, all the focus is on that initial, what does it take to get it built? And there's an unappreciable weight put on what happens after it's built and it's in the wild, right? There's a lot of road mapping, innovation, and evolution of that platform. And that thinking has to go in place early on so as to allow for that evolution to occur. And I think that oftentimes people aren't thinking about that. It's just speed, get it to market, and then damn the consequences down the road. The other thing that I think I've learned, not only in terms of feeding project briefs or specifications to our internal team, but also receiving those from prospects, is that oftentimes they're skeletal structures. There's not a lot of depth to them. And reality is, while that's fast and it gives you at least a true north or a heading, the less detail in that, the more variability that could come from, the timeline and the estimate associated with that timeline. And that ends up being a challenge as well. Any thoughts on those two fronts?
Yeah, you reminded me of something that, talking about the level of detail and this dynamic. AI has flipped the attention economy, where used to you had time to sit and think about what was going to go into an artifact, whether it's, a piece of writing or a deliverable, requirements or use cases, whatever it would be. You had time to think about it. And because you put the thought in and built it, people had to take the time to read and ingest and think about that as well. You didn't overproduce because you only had, an 8 hour or 10 hour workday. So there was this governor of how much of this content could get created. So you had to choose the level of efficiency in order to stay productive. So the amount of documentation that you would get from your team members to read and ingest was manageable. Well, now it's so easy to produce so much. And it's even harder to take the time to get the AI to make it more concise and say, well,
Right.
take this out. And, it's just like, yeah, that looks good. And you send it forward, but you just send it to a colleague who already got 10 of those. And what they usually do is they take the document you produced and they feed it to the AI and say,
Yeah.
summarize this for me.
Yeah.
And so the level of detail that may have just been missed, very important detail, very, very important detail, a point that just got lost in a bunch of, and I'll say slop, it got lost in slop, but it contained within that slop was important information. Then it got summarized. And so it's like an image that's going through a photocopier 3, 4, 5 times, and you've just lost the point. And so that's another kind of thing that we as knowledge workers, whether it's technical or financial or whatever it is, need to guard against in this case.
Well, as we close this episode out, like I mentioned earlier, I think we've spawned a couple of other topics from it. But what are some things that you would imagine the audience would want to know that we haven't already talked about that need to be taken into consideration so that they don't pay the price dearly for having leaned their ladder against the wrong wall, invested in only to find out that, I'm throwing good money after bad? Anything else that you can think of that we might want to surface on this before we wind down the session?
Well, I think, we're in a very exciting yet transformative state in technology in particular and in knowledge work. And it is creating all kinds of opportunities and challenges for us. And I think that our clients people in our field should be seeking to understand how these amazing tools can be used to accomplish things that were so difficult to do. This is something we should embrace. We should look for opportunities here and what it can do to improve every aspect of what we're doing. Know that you can bring in a level of engineering rigor so that if you're implementing a system that you can minimize or mitigate the risks of some of these dangers we've been talking about. I don't want to sound so much like AI can really sabotage your project and it can really build a system that is built on sand instead of stone. No, not at all. You should be able to realize the benefits of AI and AI-based projects so that it can unlock things that you probably couldn't have done easily or would have been so expensive is now possible. But don't take for granted the fact that you still need this rigor and you still need to have the proper amount of attention and planning and human element in this, at least now. Things could change in the coming years, but right now this is still extremely important.
Yeah. I've swung from let's agentify all these roles and let's get something done in a weekend to, well, maybe we're actually not as far from what we were doing in the past in terms of still having the rigor and the time and energy that's needing to be spent on a project like this. It's probably somewhere in the middle. It's not in my estimation, a people-free type of a project. There's still a human that's involved in orchestrating and leveraging appropriately AI. But I think that's going to be the thing that we're all going to be wrestling with is what's to be believed in terms of the stories around a weekend project being delivered as production-ready code. And then, of course, there's the protracted multi-year project that's probably not appropriate or necessary anymore. But I think we covered some good ground, Todd. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And for those of you that are listening in, there'll be more to come. As mentioned, there's already planned topics. And of course, we can have offshoots to the topics that we've broached on this particular call. But thanks for joining and thanks everybody for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.